Okay, thanks for everyone for coming so late. This is the last event of the day, and we're about halfway through TWT. This is the 7th edition, right? We've been here, by we I mean Autonomy, we've been here every year, and it's been really great to see it go from strength to strength, and I would emphasize, as well as saying thank you to them, I would emphasize becoming a supporter. I'm a supporter, I'm sure lots of you are too, but it's great to have an institution where we can have these events where they're not sponsored by Amazon or BT, as other fringe events at the Labour Conference are. They're basically supported by people like you and I, and friendly trade unions and foundations, but it really does rely on our support, so I would recommend becoming a supporter if you're not already, but I'm sure plenty of you are. My notes are on my phone, I'm not just texting people. So this session is going to focus on one of the most exciting policy proposals and ideas and demands that have emerged in recent years. But of course, basic income has a longer history than that. I'm not going to go through it all, but I think the rich history of progressive movements and individuals, intellectuals, and organizations, ranging from figures such as Martin Luther King, Bertrand Russell, Thomas Paine, as well as campaigners for universal forms of benefits like Eleanor Rathbone, speak to this issue in a way which I think should make us all, I think it's an important point to make that the false characterization of basic income as kind of having advocates on left and right is something that we need to dispel strongly by looking into the rich history of this idea, which I think is a topic of another session. But in the last 5 years in the UK, the movement for a basic income has really accelerated, and that is due to the amazing work of campaigners. Research organizations have played their part. I work for one called Autonomy. But in general, the kind of activist space in this area has become incredibly fertile, and that's what's brought us here today, really. I remember in 2016, panels around that time was the kind of usual academics, a few activists who've been in this space for a long time, but they were basically the same old kind of players. Now, we have a huge number of organizations pushing this issue, and today we have a panel with 2 mayors and an MP. Oh wait, no, sorry, no, an MP and 2 mayors. Andy Burnham's going to join us in about half an hour, so that's why he's not here right now. We have, really ambitious political leaders who are pushing progressive agendas with basic income right at the heart. So I think that's like a really significant development, and even in the short time that I've been working on this issue, we've seen a huge kind of push for this, and I think that's something which we should be very, very excited about. I'm Will Strong, I'm the Director of Research at Autonomy. We have done a lot of work on this issue. We also work on things such as the 4-day week, and I think we are always going to be working on this until such a policy is achieved in the UK, basically. And we're going to constantly be kind of putting research out and helping campaigns such as the Basic Income Conversation, who's co-hosting this event today. So joining me on this panel, I'm very, very happy to say we have Beth Winter MP for Cynon in Wales. We have it's going to be a battle of the applause now to see how much Jamie gets. Jamie Driscoll, who's the Mayor of North Tyneside Combined Authority. And that's it. And also Cleo Goodman, who is, it's very safe to say, one of one of the UK's leading basic income campaigners, and I'm happy to have worked with her before. And Andy Burnham, who's not here yet, but he doesn't get an applause. So the format for today is that each speaker will have about 10 minutes to speak to this issue. We're then going to have a couple questions, a bit of a conversation amongst ourselves, and then we're going to open up to the floor. So there'll be plenty of time for questions. I think my one contribution of substance, I think it's important to keep basic income in the historical context of welfare to some extent. There's the whole multi-dividend case for basic income, but I think the context of welfare in the UK is particularly pertinent to the debate. I think it's safe to say, or at least I would argue, that we've almost never had a really progressive welfare state policy in this country. If you go back to the 19th century poor laws and the workhouse system, which is explicitly designed to make life outside of work worse and borderline intolerable. If you go back to the invention of labour exchanges in the early 1900s, where debates in Parliament involving characters such as Churchill and others were trying to use labour exchanges explicitly to kind of sort out the deserving and the undeserving poor, right through to today's universal credit and workfare systems. There's a brief interlude in the post-war period with the invention of, let's say, the kind of beverage welfare state, where in fact, of course, the real progressive element of that was the universalism. But the labour market's very different today. And I think we have an opportunity on our hands, basically, to have, for perhaps the first time, I don't think that's that controversial to say, a social security system which basically treats everyone with dignity, just for existing, just for living in a place, and doesn't need to test their behavior, doesn't need to test whether they're telling the truth or not in order to have that support. So I think that's what's exciting about basic income, as well as all the other kind of other cases for. Now we're going to hear a lot about real-world examples, we're going to hear a lot about what's going on with basic income in the world today, so I'm quite excited about that. And without further ado, I had one more final note, and this is just in a plea to try and avoid a fairly common misconception about basic income. And for those who've just come to this and they don't know what basic income is, it's an unconditional cash payment which is given to individuals as a right regularly and is supposed to be set at a level which can meet some basic needs, and there's very different versions of it. But a common misconception and a common argument, which it's a bit of a bugbear for me, is to think that there is a dichotomy between public services and a social security system. And so I want to say, I think it's very safe to say that the people sitting alongside me today are strong advocates for public services. It might even be the case that they're advocates for public services that are free at the point of use in the main, and I share that belief. I don't want to speak for them, they can correct me on that. But I think it's a false dichotomy to split services from income support. We don't have a dichotomy between, we don't say we can have the NHS, but we can't have job seekers allowance. So I think it's something I want to try and avoid in the debate, but if people want to ask that question, we can have a discussion. Okay, enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Beth to begin, and then we'll go down the line until Andy turns up in a few minutes. Is that mic working?
Hello, yeah, great. Diolch yn fawr, thank you very much. And thank you, Will, for organising this event and for inviting me. And I also want to say diolch yn fawr to the World Transformed for having me again. It's lovely to be back here. And it's lovely to see so many people in the audience, because I know there's lots of sessions being run simultaneously. So this is really excellent in terms of the turnout. Now, the conversation tonight is going to be focusing on universal basic income, but I just want to say a word or two about the economic context in which the pilot in Wales is being undertaken. I and fellow MPs were up in Parliament on Friday when Kwasi Kwarteng made the mini-budget statement. And, you know, they've said that they've been far too focused on redistribution and not on growth. But as you would have heard, announcement after announcement on Friday was about redistribution, but it was redistribution to the wealthy, the bankers, the fossil fuel giants, the 1% who hold the overwhelming majority of the wealth in this country. You know, most people up and down this country, and most of my constituents in Cynon Valley, who work in the public sector, who are on social security benefits, who are reliant on pensions, have not experienced any form of redistribution. That's all they've experienced, are pay freezes, you know, the freeze on the triple lock, benefits cap. So, you know, I just want to start by saying now is the time that we must unite, both industrially and politically. We need to come together, say enough is enough, and I know there's another session somewhere else in Liverpool happening as we speak on by that campaign. You know, we've got to be arguing for inflation-proofed increases in pay, pensions, benefits. and start the fight back and working collectively, develop that movement from the grassroots up. Now is the time more than ever, because the majority of people are suffering, and they needn't be suffering when you've got projections over the next 2 years that the utilities are going to be making £170 billion in profit. This isn't the world or the society that we want to be living in. I'll stop there because I could go on a lot longer. But that is relevant, because for me, UBI is part of the transformative agenda that we need to be taking place in our communities and our society. And that's what drew me to the Universal Basic Income campaign and movement when I entered Parliament back in 2019. So I've got the easy job this evening, I think, because I'm very fortunate and proud to be Welsh. Welsh Government, under the leadership of Mark Drakeford, has adopted bold and progressive policies in all sorts of areas, including the announcement in the programme for government to launch a basic income pilot, which commenced in July of this year in Wales. So we are piloting a pilot in Wales, and I'm so proud of that. So I've been asked to start by saying, how do we get to this point in Wales? Hopefully to inform other pilots that I hope will be developed throughout the country. For me, it really is testament to the grassroots and collaborative movement that has developed in Wales on universal basic income. And I'm sitting here today speaking on behalf of that movement. And I've got to mention Jonathan Williams of UBI Lab Wales, who really has played an instrumental role in the development of UBI, leading to the pilot in Wales. So UBI Lab was established in 2020 in Wales, and very quickly it achieved a great deal. The Senedd, which is our devolved government in Wales, passed a motion in support of UBI. Then during the Senedd elections last year, the UBI Lab managed to get over 100 Senedd members to sign a pledge supporting UBI. And the Future Generations Commissioner in Wales, the only Future Generations Commissioner in the UK, I think, along with, crucially, our very first Minister, Mark Drakeford, have publicly, for some time, endorsed and supported the notion of a universal basic income. So we really were knocking at an open door in Wales. And like I said, the campaign culminated in the launch of the pilot. And I must mention that it really was an honour last year to host a session at the World Transformed in Brighton with Professor Guy Standing, who many of you will know. He really is a leading light in the UBI movement. And our First Minister, Mark Drakeford, spoke on this very platform. It was a packed audience. There really was a buzz in the air. And shortly afterwards, we had the pilot. So, things can be achieved. And it's thanks to, like I said, grassroots movements, people like Will, Cleo, UBI Lab, Autonomy, really putting pressure on politicians, but also getting the message out there about the alternatives that are available to us. So about the pilot, it is for young care leavers in Wales. Around 500 are anticipated or will be invited to take part in the pilot. It'll run for 3 years, and each individual young care leaver will get a payment of £1,600 per month. No questions asked. It will be available to every single young person for 24 months. But they'll also be offered a support package to run alongside that. So, if they're experiencing other issues as well, they will be provided with appropriate support. There's also a technical advisory committee to monitor and evaluate the pilot. So at the end of the pilot, we will have some really rich qualitative and quantitative data to be able to assess the success and lessons that can be learned from the pilot in Wales. And we're fortunate to have Professor Michael Marmot chairing that technical advisory group. Guy Standing is also sitting on it, and Jonathan Williams of UBI Lab Wales. And Kay Leavers are also involved in the evaluation and monitoring process, which I think is crucial as well. Now, the pilot does have limitations, and I'm glad to say the Welsh Government acknowledged those limitations. Those limitations are outside Welsh Government's control, primarily because the purse strings are still held in Westminster. So there were limits, financially primarily, placed upon what the pilot could involve. And questions being asked about, the geographical location, universality. However, the amount is significantly higher than any other basic income pilot globally, and is broadly equivalent to the real living wage. And despite some limitations, this pilot really will provide a test for the benefits of basic income, such as addressing poverty, inequality, health and well-being measures. So it's such an opportunity, I think, for the UBI movement. And I really do hope that it will lead to other pilots, such as those proposed by some of the metro mayors as well. So what next? There is a cross-party parliamentary group and local authority working group on UBI. And it really is quite an original and innovative group. So it consists of members of parliament, but it also has some of the mayors sitting on the group, local authority elected members. So, it involves all levels of society politically in terms of its membership. We've either just published or about to publish a letter which is going to be sent to the Prime Minister, calling on them to set up a task force on UBI and to launch pilots in the 4 nations. So if you are an elected politician, please look out for that letter and get your signature on that. Also, we encourage people to join the group, and whether in your own local authority area, in the groups that you're involved, get things moving in your local community. My CLP passed a motion, my local authorities passed a motion in support of UBI. And I think the example of what we've achieved in Wales really does show the power and the potential for grassroots movements to bring about positive changes. So please get involved if you can in your local UBI movements. I've also been asked to say a word or two about what the role of the Labour Party is. Well, in Wales, the Labour Party is already playing a key role, and it was under the radical leadership of Mark Drakeford that we've managed to secure the pilot. I would say, though, or add, that the pilot is a cross-party agreement. So it's a collaborative approach. Plaid Cymru are also involved in developing the pilot, because that's how we work in Wales. We do work consensually where we can agree. And I think that is, again, something that we've got to take a positive note from. And we have had leadership in Wales, in the UK, from the Labour Party. And I just want to remind us that in our 2019 manifesto, the following pledge was included. And I'll quote this: "We will explore other innovative ways of responding to low pay, including a pilot of universal basic income." And what we need now is pressure to commit to backing Welsh Labour's pilot, trialling this policy elsewhere. Like I said, I really do hope that the Metro Mayors are able to do that, but also to situate political support within a radical policy agenda on incomes, working practices. And as I started out by saying about, what's been going on in terms of Westminster and the appalling budget that was announced, for me, UBI is part of a whole raft of socialist policies. I am an extremely proud socialist. So inflation-proofed increases in income, wages, pensions, reintroduction of the £20 universal credit, extension of sick benefit payments to those on legacy benefits. You know, I'm not opposed to universal basic services either. 4-day week, windfall taxes, a wealth tax, public ownership of utilities. UBI is in the mix with all these socialist policies, which we can and we must achieve for a better society for all. If we're ever going to tackle the extreme, and I mean extreme levels of poverty and inequality that exist in our communities at the moment, we've got to get the Labour Party to have these policies, including pilots of UBI, at the forefront of our agenda. And all of us in this room can make such a valuable contribution to achieving that. I'll stop there, and diolch yn fawr for listening.
Thanks, Beth. Jamie.
Cheers, well, it's great to be back here, particularly at the Blackheath TWT. I was here running sessions with part of the team that started it way back in 2016. Doesn't that seem such a long time ago now? Wow, and the hope we had then. Our hope is of a different nature now. We already have basic income in this country. It's like the Dire Straits song, your money for nothing and your chicks for free. And that's the philosophical objection to a universal basic income. In fact, at its heart, there are two objections to UBI. One, it's money for nothing, and two, how would you pay for it? So, is it really money for nothing? Well, when my wife and I, we do the shopping and put food on the table for our kids, we don't keep a tally of the money they owe us. We just know that to grow up healthy and capable, they'll need food and warmth and shelter, and books and toys and transport. In other words, a decent standard of living. And I don't expect them to pay it back. I expect them to pay it forwards by contributing to society. Perhaps in time looking after their kids as my parents looked after me. But if you're from a rich family, that support doesn't stop with food and shelter. The sovereign grant paid to the monarch was £86 million last year. The king has just inherited a $42 billion estate and a private fortune worth 500 million quid. But even a typical rich adult with a few million quid's worth of shares or a couple of dozen rental properties, where does that money come from? Well, not from creating anything or making the world a better place. They get an income in rents and dividends just from owning stuff. And let's be clear, nobody got rich on their own, nobody. If you're getting rent from property, someone else is earning the money to pay it. If you're getting dividends, other people are producing the goods and services. They're moving goods to market on the roads that the rest of us paid for. They're hiring workers the rest of us paid to educate. Their businesses are safe because of the police and fire services the rest of us fund. And they don't have to worry that marauding bandits are going to come and seize their Aston Martins and their holiday homes. So if you can be born into a family who'll set you up with a flat and pay your university fees and buy you a car and give you a little trust fund, all by accident of birth, then why shouldn't everyone benefit from getting a share of national wealth just by being born? So the rich already have unearned income. It's been that way for centuries. But is UBI really money for nothing? Or is it money to empower people? We know beyond all doubt that if you start out poor, you're going to find it very hard to escape poverty. Your health will be worse. You'll have a longer period of ill health in old age. Your educational attainment will be lower. Your lifetime income will be lower. If we invest in people, they will become happier, healthier, more productive, better educated. They'll look after their homes better because they can afford to. They'll spend less time in hospital, they'll earn more and pay more tax. It's a virtuous circle. A bit of financial security empowers people to take care of themselves. After he left the army, my dad worked in the same job for 30 years. He was a shift worker at ICI. And even if we have a socialist Labour government that guarantees collective bargaining, repeals anti-trade union laws, those days of having the same job for life are gone. People will need to retrain. Half the jobs people do today didn't even exist when I was at school 3 years ago. My eldest son has just done his GCSEs. He'll reach state pension age in 2074. How do we educate our children to take a place in that future, given that we don't even know what's going to happen with our economy next year? Well, we can't. So what we need is to give people a basic income so they can retrain, and the freedom and the flexibility to do it around their work and their childcare and their caring responsibilities. UBI would massively empower women in particular, something that's long overdue. And we'd see people of ordinary means more able to start micro-businesses. UBI dovetails with universal free education for life, and that means an end to tuition fees. In fact, the evidence from UBI pilots around the world showed that people didn't work less, except for two groups. Teenagers were less likely to go into low-paid work and spent more time on their education, and mothers spent less time in part-time work and spent more time with their very young children. And I'd love to think more dads would take time off to look after their young kids too. So it's not money for nothing. It's money to improve yourself, your skills, your health, your family life, your earning potential. And society benefits from all those things. So that's the money for nothing argument dealt with. So how do you pay for it? Well, this is where basic income becomes a conversation. What level would you set it at? Would it replace all of the benefits? How would you change the provision of services? And there are two ends to this spectrum, the neoliberal version and the libertarian socialist version. The neoliberal version of UBI replaces all welfare, all free services. Private companies come in, make a fortune from health, education, housing, the lot. It's like quantitative easing on steroids. And the level of UBI is too low to survive on, so people still need to work in exploitative employment in the gig economy. And we'd probably see the erosion of the minimum wage at the same time. So we're not interested in that model. Then there's the socialist model, where the level is enough to make a difference. Now, please nobody tweet that I'm about to introduce UBI in the Northeast. These are just ballpark figures for discussion. But let's say UBI was paid at the same level as the current state pension, which is a kind of UBI. That's £185 a week, just short of £10,000 a year. And you might pay half of that for under 16s, let's say. So nationally, that would cost around £460 billion a year. That's a lot of money. The UK's GDP is 2.2 trillion a year, or around £36,000 a year for each adult. So a decent rate of UBI is a large chunk of national income. But you would immediately recover around 160 billion in income tax and national insurance, because people's incomes go up. And that's without change to the tax system. The benefits bill is around 100 billion a year, so you'd save that. But you wouldn't keep the tax system the same. At the moment, the personal allowance, how much you can earn without paying income tax, is £12,570. But if you earn more than £100,000, well, that gets phased out. So by lowering the threshold, you could get another 90 billion. So now we're 210 billion short. If you brought in a wealth tax, where people pay just 1% of their wealth over £4 million a year, that raises another £130 million a year. So we're now 80 billion short. Well, the Truss government is about to spend 140 billion a year subsidising energy producers, nearly twice that. A windfall tax on excess profits would raise 170 billion a year. And that's without factoring the extra VAT or economic growth, because when you put money in the pockets of people of ordinary means, they spend it in the real economy. And we could tax shares and capital gains at the same level as income. And if we took the utilities into public ownership, there's even more money available at the public purse, because they make billions in profits. You'd still want additional support for people with disabilities. So these are all rough and ready figures, but it shows it's actually possible if we tax the accumulation of very large sums of private wealth at a nice modest 1% a year. What would we get in return? Poverty would be eliminated overnight. There would be no sanctions regime, no food banks. Every family would have a real safety net. Economic power would shift to working people, and bad employment would end. Intervention programs would actually work. When you're trying to help people with serious mental health or substance abuse problems, at the moment it's a treadmill, because they're so poor that they are hyper-vulnerable. Basic income would give them some stability. Crime would fall. The single biggest determinant of a healthy life expectancy isn't diet, it isn't exercise either, it's money. One trial of basic income showed a 27% reduction in illness. It would save the NHS a fortune and reduce the number of sick days. You'd have to avoid an economic shock, so you'd phase it in, maybe 1/5 of it a year, so you don't get a sudden mass resignation. And we'd need rent controls to stop profiteering. Well, we need rent controls anyway. We'd need to redeploy the people working in the benefit system. And then there's the long-term benefits. We could shift away from a consumerist mindset and invest in public luxury. We could tax environmentally damaging consumption and spend the extra income on leisure. Libraries. Do you remember libraries? With proper computer suites, publicly owned gardens and swimming pools and exercise classes. More live music and performance art, and people would have the disposable income to pay for them. We could shift away from private cars and at the same time provide better public transport. Labour mayors are moving in that direction now. Andy, when he's here, he's already taken the buses back into public control, and I've negotiated to get those powers in the northeast. In the 1870s, the government brought in free compulsory primary education. Suddenly, a basic education was no longer the preserve of the wealthy. It was for everyone. And that liberation of children from low-value work is the foundation of our modern economy. It was a revolutionary policy. Now, you all know the story of the NHS. Free at the point of delivery, funded by general taxation. Based on clinical need, not the ability to pay. Universal for everyone. But before 1948, we had no National Health Service. Those who opposed it said the sky would fall in. They were wrong. When Labour brought in the minimum wage, the free market economists said it would cause mass unemployment. They were wrong. And today, I think we're ready for the next revolutionary policy. The rich have had free income forever. It's time to crash that party. It's time everyone had a universal basic income. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. And just in time, we have Andy Burnham, Metro Mayor for the Greater Manchester area. And are you okay to jump straight in?
I don't want to.
No, please. I think you have to leave early, right?
I do, I'm afraid. But a bit of a tight deadline. So, evening, everyone. You okay? You having a good time in the city? Yeah. What a venue as well. Fantastic. Great to listen to Jamie there. You never see a Metro Mayor, do you? And then two come along and hog the microphone one straight after another. So, sorry about that. But I really wanted to be here. I just want to say something about your perspective changes when you're out of Westminster, and mine definitely has, I'll be honest about that, the way you think about things. And when you're on the ground looking back up, and the work I've been doing in Greater Manchester has told me that we set people up to fail in this country, don't we? The way things are set up, the rules, the rhetoric, that people are set up to fail. And the reason why I'm here, I'm going to follow on from what Jamie just said, the reason why I'm supporting a universal basic income and offering Greater Manchester, by the way, to be the first trial area when a Labour government comes in and wants to do it, we will be first there, maybe alongside the north of Tyne. We will say, come here first. Isn't it about time we started setting people up to succeed? Put foundations underneath people that allow them to be everything they want to be. Surely that's what we should be doing. And the thing for me about a universal basic income is it wouldn't just be good for people if you set them up to succeed. It would be good for the country. Because at the moment we pay massively for the costs of failure, don't we? Allowing people to experience trauma, fall into crisis, and the costs that we kind of then pick up as a result. If we set people up to succeed, we would set the country up to succeed, and we wouldn't spend as much as a country on the costs of social failure and everything that comes from that. And there will be people out there, as you all know, that will say, oh, well, it can't be done, it can't be afforded. Well, let's take this one head on. It's amazing what they can find money for, isn't it, when they want to find money for something. On Friday, could you believe it when you were seeing what they were announcing? I mean, you kind of wondered how audacious they would be, but by God, that was beyond audacious, wasn't it? That was battle lines drawn. We protect these people who are our donors, our supporters, and we are declaring war on everywhere else. That's how that felt to me when I was seeing what they did. And to say magic money tree, well, my God, they didn't just find it. They found an orchard, didn't they? And they showered it on the very wealthiest in this country. So to those who will say, we can't afford a universal basic income, well, I'm sorry, we can if we want to do it. And can I just give a shout out? I don't know whether Jamie did it or anyone else on the panel has done it. Forgive me if they have. But can we just have a shout out to Mark Drakeford, our First Minister in Wales, who has given a universal basic income to young people who've experienced care. Now that is such a forward-thinking, good policy from a good man. We've only got a pay limitation in Greater Manchester. We've given a free bus pass to our young people, but we've extended it to the age of 21 for our young people who've been in care. But what I see through policies like that is you start to set people up to succeed. And this is the point. The thing that really changed my mind, or kind of opened my mind to a universal basic income, was the work we did on housing homelessness. We had a pilot scheme, Housing First, and they've got one here in Liverpool and similar results. For those of you who don't know about Housing First, it gives people a home without any conditions. And the reason why this is important is because the foundation of a good home is essential, isn't it, to have a good life, to have health, and everything else that comes from that. And what we found with Housing First in Greater Manchester was when we kind of lifted people out of the chaos that they were in, gave them a home, but also lifted them out of the benefit rules and all the things that you can have it for the X 6 months, and that creates new cliff edges for people, that just creates new trauma. Housing First, when you've got to recognize that everybody needs to recover in their own time, and you can't put deadlines on it as the DWP like to do or other bits of government like to do. Give people time and space to recover. And you know what? Believe it or not, they do. In Greater Manchester, 9 out of 10 of our Housing First tenancies have been sustained. And that was way beyond what anyone thought would happen. And if you put those strong foundations underneath people, people are people. People are good. The vast majority of the British public are good people, aren't they? If you've had trauma in your life, it's not that surprising then if you might have an issue with your mental health, or you may have an addiction. You've got something that you've got to recover from. Whereas at the moment, we don't let people recover from those things. We kind of punish them with rules and trip them up and make them fall. What I've kind of seen as we've gone through this journey is that if you do the opposite, if you set people up with a foundation of a good home and you give them support to access what they need, they do recover. And more than that, they can go on then to rebuild their lives. So I would argue myself that there are a number of things that are sort of complementary to a universal basic income. For instance, I believe the next Labour government should make good, secure, safe housing a human right in UK law. And I think to deliver that, they should finally, from Whitehall, release the resources and the wherewithal to councils to make that a reality. In Greater Manchester, we have a plan for 30,000 zero-carbon homes for social rent, and we are determined to deliver it, where we prioritise young people to be able to access those properties. It's about putting a firm foundation beneath people, a secure foundation, so that they can live their life. And to me, universal basic income is like one step beyond that. If you give everybody enough so that they can cover the basics every week, you are setting them up to succeed. And that, for me, is an idea whose time has come. You know, I spoke at the Enough is Enough rally in Manchester Cathedral, and I made this point. We sold the basics off, didn't we? We sold life's essentials off as a country gas, water, electric, buses, trains, you name it, it was sold off, wasn't it? And we've got ourselves in a position now where we're in a cost of living crisis and we can't guarantee those basics for all of our residents, all of our citizens, and that is a terrible place to be. And to guarantee those basics, we have to give huge amounts of money to entities that have already been siphoning out all of those resources out of those services. So for me, I think this is about changing things more broadly, putting more of those life's essentials under public control. I have put the buses under public control, as Jamie rightly said, in Greater Manchester, and we've brought in a fare cap. And I can already see the impact that that is having on people. But I would like to see more of those essentials going under public control, public ownership, so that then we can make sure that everyone can access those things at an affordable price. And that is part of, in my view, working towards a universal basic income where everyone's got enough to cover the basics. But I'll finish on this point, and it comes back to what we saw last week. What word would you use to describe it? I mean, immoral, does that do it for most people? Obscene? Disgraceful? I mean, I don't think we've ever seen something this audacious, have we? Basically what we saw in the summer was a kind of, for me, a graphic demonstration of how the political system in this country works for the vested interest rather than the common interest. Basically, that's what we've seen. So for those of you who are delegates to the conference and have any influence, I would say please do support electoral reform, proportional representation. That gets the power out of the hands of a tiny few people in Whitehall and Westminster who are able to stitch up these deals for the people who are benefiting to the tune of billions. And they're borrowing it. It's not even money we've got as a country. They're borrowing it to give it to them. It couldn't be more wrong. And even at the other end, when people say, oh, the 20p rate of tax, well, who benefits from that if you drop it to 19? It's not your care worker who's on 15 to 20 grand. They get about 25 or 50 quid a year at tops. It's people who earn over £50,000 who get most from cutting that rate of tax. And all of these policies are doing that. They're giving more to those who've already got most. And we need to take a stand against it. I would say oppose all of the Kwarteng package because it doesn't do anything other than redistribute wealth to the wealthiest. That is what that is doing, all of it, all of those measures. So let's start fighting back, everybody. I'm here to say that. I mean, I've been on a political journey. I was in Westminster, and in the end, I kind of left because I could see what it was doing to me and the way it makes you think and the way it makes you work. The best thing I ever did was step outside and start to think more for myself and see things on the ground. Do the work that we did on rough sleeping, where we've achieved a massive reduction in rough sleeping in Greater Manchester, but then see Housing First and how that can continue people's journey away from the street. As I said before, people will recover if you support them to recover. And what we've got to do now is say enough is enough. This country is in a terrible position where this winter, millions of people will be worrying themselves to sleep every night because they can't make it work. And that budget on Friday did nothing for them. Next to nothing is probably a more accurate description. It didn't do anything like enough to stop their heads dipping beneath the water this winter. And that is a terrible place that we're in. We're going to see anxiety rising, the mental health crisis across the country. And that's where we are. And I think people out there are ready for a different way of running things. They're ready to end the food bank culture. They're ready to say, let's guarantee the basics for all of our fellow citizens every day of the week when nobody has to worry about keeping warm or being fed. That's the kind of country I want to live in. You're all here tonight because I'm certain it's the kind of country that you want to live in. Universal basic income should be part of that. The right to a good home and the right to a good income. If you do that, we'll set this country up to succeed in the next century. Keep building this campaign. It's the right campaign. The right time. You've got my full support. Thank you very much indeed for listening.
We're okay to stick around for you don't have to. You can if you need to run off now. That's fine. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, I'm going to hand over to Cleo, who's been running this campaign alongside all the other organisations. So, yeah, very looking forward to hearing from.
Hello, yes, I'm Cleo. I run a campaign called Basic Income Conversation, which is hosted by Compass. I'm going to start off, it's amazing to sit between these politicians making the case for basic income so eloquently and so powerfully, and in a room with all of you, which is a privilege after starting the basic income conversation at the end of 2019 and not getting to do this as much as we wanted to. I want to talk a bit about action and what we can do and how we can make sure that these guys are continuing with this amazing work and that more politicians are joining this movement for a basic income. And just to start off and echo how important or how beneficial and impactful a basic income would be. That is the number one reason that we want to see it happen. It would take us from a exploitative and eroded social security system to a universal income floor for everyone in the country. A basic income can reduce poverty really meaningfully. A high-level basic income, like Jamie was saying, funded through lots of different progressive measures can do that much more effectively, but even a fiscally neutral, modest basic income that is just funded through slightly higher taxes for the highest earners and reducing the personal tax allowance to £750 a year would give us £63 a week each. And even that modest level of payment would roll back poverty to the lowest levels of the last 45 years, child poverty down to the rates that it was in the 1970s when it was at its lowest. So it's affordable, and that would concentrate the benefits at the lowest end of the income spectrum, exactly the opposite of what we're seeing at the moment, as has already been said. A basic income deals with financial security, and as we know, politics depends on people seeing their needs represented in the narratives that are being shared at a political level. So that's why things that Build Back Better and Take Back Control and Enough is Enough are resonating with us at this point. Narratives that express how we feel and are associated with policy changes that also take us to a place where those needs are actually starting to be met. So we need evocative narratives, but actually we also need evocative policies, and they're a bit rarer, I think. But that's what makes a basic income so special, the simplicity, the comprehensiveness. And when you listen to just what it is, it makes you feel how it would be to have a guaranteed income for life, financial security for life, something that so many of us just don't have access to right now and are seeing the impact on other people on not having that. It really gets to the heart of a bigger political project of providing security universally, which universal basic income can't do alone, but it can be a sort of keystone policy for that, both in the political movement to winning power to implement these policies, but to the actual rollout of the measures that are needed to do that. So a basic income has high levels of public support. Sort of polling shows 48% across the population, 52% for Labour voters. We've recently done we're publishing some work soon that has been done in red wall constituencies that show high levels of support there. But a basic income is a policy that moves people to action. Politicians have been taking action a lot over the last 3 years, and that really has moved the debate forward. But the policy is where it is because of unpaid people doing work on this policy that they can see would make an impact on their life. And the irony there is not lost on me as someone that has done that. But that work is crucial, and that's, I'm here to sort of encourage you to get involved in that work so we can make sure, again, that the pressure is on and that it keeps moving forward, that it doesn't stagnate. We do need political parties, of course. We need political parties on board to make it happen, and the politics that associates with basic income and winning the progressive majority that is needed will be discussed at the Compass event tomorrow night. So my colleagues Lena and Francis are here to hand out some flyers with information on things that I would love for you to get involved with. That include the CPPLG that Beth mentioned earlier. We have a sort of mailing list that you can sign up to and get involved with all of that. But yes, so I wanted to talk a little bit more about action, because it is difficult to think about how we take action or incremental action on a universal policy. And I think this is exactly why pilots have become such a big part of the basic income debate. And there is a kind of valid criticism of pilots as a sort of, well, we'll try it. When you call for a policy measure like a universal basic income, the answer is, okay, we can try it. But personally, I do think that pilots have a really, really important role in this. You know, we do need to test such a vast policy. We need to make sure that it works. That data collection is really crucial, and basic income pilots have been being done in economies similar to the UK for the last sort of 50, 60 years. So we have a really interesting bank of evidence on basic income, again, showing that health impacts, the mental health impacts, the improved outcomes for children, disproving that concern that people would leave paid work if they were receiving a basic income. But I think I want to see pilots associated with the rollout of a basic income. I think it's really important as people that support basic income, we keep an eye on incredible projects like the basic income pilot in Wales, and we make sure that that isn't just an experiment, that isn't just a look at this policy. It leads to change now that will make those policies permanent and mean those benefits become permanent. I think, yeah, the Welsh pilot particularly is so exciting because it is a targeted basic income, so potentially that could lead to a targeted policy that would be an incredible advert for a basic income and an incredibly important policy for a group of people, young care leavers, that need it enormously at this point in history. At Basic Income Conversation, we've been really inspired by the basic income demonstrations that have been happening in the US. There are now 100 demonstrations happening in the United States of America, which I think is interesting. It's maybe not a country that you would think would be picking up the policy, although I guess it's, yeah, unconditional cash, it's got a bit of, it's established there. And this shows the real world impact that a basic income pilot can have. And these projects are built with communities. The first one in Stockton, California was trailblazed by a mayor, and again, there's a network of mayors across the US that are really driving these demonstrations, and it shows just what mayors can achieve with this policy. So again, really hoping that this continues in the UK or transfers to the UK. But these pilots, they call them demonstrations because they are not just data collection exercises. They are demonstrating the impact of unconditional cash. They work with people who are participating in these pilots and the communities that are being used as testbeds to make sure that the stories stay with those people. The way that that data is communicated is led by the people that data concerns. So it's not just telling the story of an experiment, it's telling the story of a place, it's telling the story of the people who needed that money and for a short period of time had that money and the impact that made. We're working with a couple of communities at the moment to do consultations to build proposals for these kind of community-led pilots because we think this is the best way to show government, to show civil society organisations and to show people just what this policy could do, to bring it to life and make sure it's not just people talking about how nice it would be, it's not just numbers on a page, it's people who have received a basic income telling the rest of us, this is good, man. let's get this for all of us. So we're doing these community consultations in Jarrow, which is in the northeast, a place with incredible history of taking action. Nearly 100 years ago, 1936, 200 men protesting unemployment and poverty in Jarrow, taking a petition to London. It remains, unfortunately. The same problems that were being protested against then remain now. The town that was murdered, as it was called by Ellen Wilkinson, the MP at the time. The other place we're doing these consultations is Grange in East Finchley in London, a place where the inequality of the country is almost best represented, a place where people are living in poverty and there are stones throw away from streets where every single house will cost you in the order of millions. So these places, we're working with the people there to build projects that would tell the story of these places, that would demonstrate the impact of a basic income, of unconditional cash, and that would, for a short period, give people this financial security that we're so interested in seeing universalized. So a universal basic income for all of us is the big project. And to some degree, yeah, that's going to be won by politicians, but we need to be there alongside them and to making sure that they're keeping to that fight. But there is work that we can do on the ground. And I really think that these community projects are things that we should be invested in and excited about. Maybe we'll have 100 pilots in the UK in the next few years like they have in the US. And perhaps for some of us, our basic income is closer than it might feel. But I think it's really important to come back to the fact that in the UK right now, over the next 2 years, 500 people will receive a basic income for that 2 years. And I think it really, again, it's been so heartening to know that this work, this grassroots movement, led by unpaid people, led by people that care about this policy and that can see the enormity of the change that it would represent, have led to a real world impact for those people. And yeah, there's just more to come, and it's really exciting to be here tonight.
Thanks, Cleo. And I can speak from personal experience. Autonomy, working with basic income conversation it's been really great. And I think speaking to what Beth was saying about the spirit of collaboration, I think that's, there's a really nice network now of organizations working together. And I can't emphasize enough also the help of volunteers in the movement. I'm actually not going to have a kind of conversation between us first. I think we're going to go straight to questions. So let's take bunches of threes, and then we'll go back for more, and et cetera, et cetera. Do we need a roaming mic? Does someone want one of these? You got one? Okay, cool. Let's go gentleman at the back, there's a woman over here, and then a woman at the front here. So 1, 2, 3. Way back, keep your hand up. Just keep your hand at the back, yeah. 1, 2. Yeah, let's go.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Could you say more about what the markers are to show that a pilot has been successful on universal basic income? So are there like specific aims for the young people involved in Wales on like job or home life or anything? And what sort of evidence is collected to show that it is successful?
Great, thank you. And there's a lady over here.
So what do you envision like the immigration conditions being on universal basic income? Because obviously no recourse to public funds and habitual residence is like really awful and puts a lot of people into poverty. But I can't imagine everyone getting behind a policy where people were given money like straight away as soon as they arrived, and I wouldn't be against that, but I'm sure a lot of people would be. So what conditions do you think would be put on it?
Thank you. And a lady down here.
I'm fully supportive of everything that's been spoken about so far. But my question is, it doesn't seem to be replicated in the present leadership we have. There's even the call for renationalising the utilities that are really popular. And I can't see, I don't know, do you have any evidence? I mean, as elected representatives, do you have any evidence of that somehow the present leader of the Labour Party is going to support this? I know the previous one would have done, but I don't know about this one. So, and what are your views? How do you see it going forward? If you think if you, as you say, it has to go through has to have a strong political role, where do we go? Thanks.
Thank you. So one technical question about the metrics used and the evaluation methods, a question about the kind of almost like kind of cultural and communications conditions for how to make this an acceptable policy. Who gets it? Okay, so that's like a second question bundled in there, but there's a question about. Right. Okay, and then also a question about the current leadership and perspectives within, let's say, Lotto of the Labour Party. Who wants to go first on what? Do you want to go, Beth? Yeah. We'll speak to any of the questions, I suppose.
So in terms of the first question, in terms of the aims, it is an unconditional payment for all care leavers in Wales. And it is, as others have spoken, and myself this evening, to ensure that those young care leavers have the basic human rights. We've talked about heating, water, a roof over your head. The basics that everybody should be entitled to. In terms of the measurement and outcomes, that is currently being considered by the technical advisory group. I mentioned some of the people involved with that, world-renowned experts. And there is another advisory group made up of the care organisations in Wales as well as care leavers themselves. It was only launched in July. The monitoring and evaluation was something that possibly could have been better thought through in the early stages, but now, you know, these groups are looking at outcomes, and crucially is the voice of care leavers themselves. They've got to be, you know, at the centre of this and determine themselves what the outcomes can and should be. And like I said, there is very much a collaborative approach. Local authorities, charities, you know, you've got to have this holistic approach, and it will be evaluated at the end. Care leavers are a diverse group, just like anybody else, you know, so what will work for one care leaver is going to be very different to another care leaver. So, you know, we can't have strict expectations in terms of outcomes, but there is a clear process to monitor throughout the 2-year period in terms of what the benefits are, but also what the lessons that can be learned from this pilot to inform future pilots, as Chloe has indicated, should be happening.
Thanks, Beth. I know, for example, I'm sure Claire could speak to some of those American trials as well about the metrics, but I know, for example, in the Finnish trials, they looked at interesting questions, for example, like trust of the state, for example, feelings of general kind of collective solidarity, these kind of questions they were asking participants. So there's a kind of qualitative social element to it, as well as you know, some of the kind of more, let's say, financial kind of metrics. But Claire, did you have anything to add to those?
Yeah, I mean, I can't believe it's been this long, taken me this long to mention Scotland, but the first sort of big funded project on basic income was funded by Scottish Government and led by 4 local authorities in Scotland to look at the feasibility of a basic income pilot in Scotland, but it's almost completely transferable across the UK. And this is sort of the basis on which that the Welsh pilot has been built to make sure that they can get around barriers that were identified in this initial research project. But it's an incredible piece of work, and this is sort of what Beth was saying about the limitations of the Welsh pilot. The Welsh pilot isn't universal, so that is the big kind of final frontier of basic income research that is the most difficult to replicate in a pilot condition, because a pilot can't be universal. That's the whole point. It's a pilot, it's a small group of people. But the best way to assess that is by doing a geographic pilot. So if you did want to test that final bit of what the universality does, and the real reason that that's so significant is because everyone receiving a basic income in a community, it's not just the individual behaviour, it's the collective behaviour that I think a lot of people who are interested in basic income think that that's probably the route to the biggest form of change. That research also put together a theory of change of how a basic income would change behaviour. So in the short term of a pilot, there's only certain things that you'll see. So things like well-being outcomes, health outcomes, that will happen in the first few years. Financial security, that will happen. But things like entrepreneurship, you'd need a 10-year pilot to see that. And at that point, why don't we just do the policy and assess how good it is?
Well, I think that's covered the evaluation, hasn't it? So let's talk about that third question. Is the party going to accept it? The Labour Party is a democratic socialist party, and the last three leadership elections have been won by candidates who supported public ownership of mail, rail, water, gas, railways, who've talked about wealth redistribution, and have said no going back from our core principles. And the vast majority of Labour Party members still want that. So one of the best things about being mayor is there is no whip. I don't have to talk about the talking points that are circulated. Beth's thinking, I wish I was. So there's your answer. There will be, at some point, inevitably, another leader of the Labour Party. There isn't a vacancy at the moment. Andy's made it no secret that at some point he would like to run. And well, Andy's not here, so that would be a question for him. I am not his campaign manager. But you know what? I'd vote for him. Yeah. So the Labour Party wants this progressive agenda. The tide in the country has changed. The vast majority of people are backing workers in strikes, even when it inconveniences them, because this is the political and economic reality now. Everything that we saw coming and we've been talking about for years has come to pass. and people who thought they might be okay financially can't even afford to take a shower without checking their bank account first. So that's the reality we're in. And that's the reality that we have to continue to fight for. And there's plenty of politicians in the Labour Party who agree with that.
Thank you.
We haven't addressed the question on on the middle question about who would be eligible. A basic income needs to be universal. I think it's really important not to shy away from the immigration component of that. We can't leave a massive group of people behind and completely isolated, as they are now, without any financial security. Just because some people might not like it. And the beautiful thing about universality is, well, if you're not happy with them getting it, then none of us get it, then you've spoiled it for all of us. And that is crucial. You know, we need to have that conversation openly and clearly and say this isn't a compromise that is acceptable to make. Yeah, we did a project at the end of last year with some solidarity funds working in London, crowdfunded a month of payment for their solidarity funds that was £50 a month, you know, and this had been an absolute lifeline to people at the end of last year. And the majority of the people accessing that fund were people with no recourse to public funds because it's just completely unacceptably low and they can't participate in society. So communities are coming together to find that money. So that can't be replicated in a basic income system. Otherwise, we're just creating another flawed system that are leaving people behind.
Great, thank you. Let's do another round of questions. Okay, gentleman at the back. There's a woman over here and a guy over here. No, this guy, yeah, sorry, yeah.
Hi everyone, I've come down from Sunderland and it was mentioned that there's, I think, a feasibility study at Jarrow School, in Jarrow. My girlfriend works at Jarrow School and I'd just be interested to know where I can find out more about that and some of the other feasibility studies because I hadn't heard of it and I live about 5 miles away. So that would be cool. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, person over here.
My question is about the potential of introducing universal basic income in the fight for climate justice. So it kind of follows as part of this conversation that if you free people from the day-to-day anxiety of worrying about how to feed themselves and how to heat their homes, that they can start worrying about the existential threat facing us. They've got more space in their minds and their lives to start engaging in climate activism. And do you see that happening in the pilots that have happened already? Is there evidence of that?
And person over here, yeah.
I haven't really looked at the individual, or at least not in detail, the individual studies or attempts, though I know that there were slight differences in terms of approach. And I mean, Italy has had a citizenship income, wasn't universal, and it will be abolished probably by the government, and they will be winning an election in less than an hour. By the way, I'm Italian. I'll need a lot of comfort, just so you know. And so that one wasn't universal. So my question is, having looked at all those attempts and studies, have you worked out what the wrong way to do it, to go about it is? Or the wrong ways, probably plural.
Thanks. Well, let's take one more as well, because the first question was kind of about for an update. So this was, yeah.
So my question was actually just, I know Beth mentioned inflation proofing, and certainly we've heard about rent caps, which is a very obvious one. But I just wondered what the other inflation proofing mechanisms that would need to be in place would be in order to ensure that private individuals and private companies aren't just taking everything up to the point that people remain in poverty even though we've got a basic income. Okay, thank you. Who wants to, Jamie?
Yeah, well, if I just pick up a couple of them and leave space for Beth and Chloe. UBI and climate justice. It would give us the opportunity to deal with consumerism. The consumerism is by far the most destructive ideology in everything we face. It's not the most hideous or the most malicious, but it's so universal that it does incredible damage because it isolates us as individuals, and it says, bombards us with messages, and psychologists cleverly designed marketeers colouring things, and oh, here's a nicer car. And for why? What does that give us in our lives? Just this. Fight Club summed it up beautifully, isn't it? It has us chasing things that we don't need. I was in, do you remember that Peppa Pig speech that Boris Johnson did? I was there about this far away. Someone described it as a stone's throw away, but he has a lot of security guards. And I don't advocate violence against public discourse. But he said, a lot of things he said, but he said that governments only have billions and the private sector has trillions, but what will really tackle the climate emergency is consumer choice. Well, what choice do you have if you are trapped doing jobs because you have to in order to get enough money to eat and enough, if you're lucky, enough money to pay your fuel bills, on a treadmill that is doing things that have no value, that do not chime with your authentic self and have no particular good for society. You know, anyone who's read David Graeber's article on bullshit jobs is familiar with this concept. So we can move towards public luxury, and that's where it starts to make a difference. Because what makes us happiest as humans isn't the acquisition of material goods. It is respect and dignity and friendship and having a laugh, all of these things. And that's where universal basic income, it's a platform for a very different sort of society. And just briefly on the inflation question, so rent caps, obviously public ownership of utilities and the production of eco and affordable housing. But it is one of the simplest ways to do this. My 14-year-old, and he's been raised as a socialist, he was saying that why don't we set up national food shops that set a certain price for food, and then all the shops would have to compete with that. And so we don't need to do that. You can just change the law. Say if you turn over more than £1 billion a year on groceries, you have to carry a line of breakfast cereal and beans and tea and cooking oil, whatever it is, at this level of quality, and you're not allowed to run out, and that's the price. The things that people actually need. And if you want to spend more money on luxury things that, you can get by on a basic diet otherwise, that pegs it. And that's the sort of thing that we need to do. And let the supermarkets worry about sourcing it, because they're making so much money. You know what? We pay more in subsidies to low-paid workers that work in these companies than they pay in tax. So let's run the society in the interests of the people who do the work.
I think just to add to that, we've all been conditioned in a certain way, and we live in a certain cultural society. It's become normalised that people use food banks. I'm involved in the Right to Food campaign with the brilliant Ian Byrne here in Liverpool, and how it's okay for 10 million plus people to be using food banks. It's just anathema to me, and I'm sure to everybody here in the room. So we have to think outside of the box and think differently. People making billions of pounds in profit, that's seen as normal, and it shouldn't be. So there's a cultural as well as an economic change that needs to be happening in our society, so that it is seen and accepted and is seen as a basic human right that people have enough food, have enough money to heat their homes properly, have enough money to feed their children. We've still, in Wales, we've got an extremely high child poverty rate. So it's just thinking differently And why can't we have a society where everybody has the opportunities to have sufficient goods, sufficient levels of education, etc., etc. And that brings me back to the climate point, which I feel I do have to just add a couple of things. We've recently done a cost of living survey in my constituency, you know, and people are on their knees. You know, they've not got enough money. 80% of the respondents are saying that it's having a negative impact on their mental health, unsurprisingly. So to expect people in our communities then to be thinking about the climate crisis, which yes is the existential crisis facing us, is very difficult. And UBI, I think, can play a role in that. And in Wales, the UBI lab are now having discussions, and a motion has been passed in the Welsh Assembly to look at how UBI can contribute to the transition to a green economy, and they are looking out to possibly pilot a scheme. So we've got about 250,000 people still working in dirty industries in Wales with steel and coal, etc. So they are now having conversations with Welsh Government to see how a UBI could assist in that transition. So there is some exciting work going on in Wales on that. I just want to take the opportunity quickly, because I know time is limited, just to come back to the comment earlier about the leadership of the party. I joined the party in 2016 and I was elected. I was just parachuted into Parliament in 2019, and then we are where we are. I've still got hope. There are still many MPs in Parliament who do still subscribe and believe passionately in the agenda, public ownership, all sorts of policies, the climate agenda that we had. We did have a commitment in the 19 manifesto to a pilot of UBI. That's still sitting there. So please, there is still hope. And we do have a voice, and we've got to use our voice. And Welsh Government in Wales, a Labour Welsh Government, is showing the way in many respects, and the Metro Mayors are doing the same here. So please don't lose hope.
Just to add to the question about the climate, there's a concept from MIT researchers called cognitive bandwidth, and so the scarcity mindset means that you have very little mental resources to basically address anything other than the basic needs, and as Beth is saying, people are on their knees. So the idea being that with things like a basic income or shorter working weeks, that you could have greater cognitive bandwidth for other activities, and that's one of the things which I think is really important to recognize, that when people make bad decisions, it's often because of this sheer amount of scarcity that's in their lives. It's not necessarily because there's, often kind of nonsense ideas about, genetics or anything like that. It's a scarcity mindset. So I think something like this is a really, really important concept.
Yeah, and to continue on the climate activism thing, I think there's not a pilot that I'm aware of that has assessed climate activism specifically or activism explicitly, and I think that's probably because most of them don't deal with that universal thing, and I think that that's likely to be a universal kind of response to a community getting it. But I do think we do have some things in the UK policies already that resemble a basic income, and pensions are one of them. And I think, as we can see, people who are receiving their pension do an enormous amount of unpaid work and activism. And I think that is a response to having a secure income and not needing to do paid work. They get to do the work that they can see needs to be done after a lifetime of doing paid work. And I think that is likely to be replicated with a universal basic income. The question about wrong ways to do basic income from pilots, again, I think because they are experiments, there's a duty of care. So they tend not to go in and do a really terrible job, because that's very unethical, and they have to pass all the ethical frameworks and stuff to be able to do these projects. To me personally, though, I think a failure of a pilot is if it doesn't lead to any long-term policy change. If it's just to use harsh words, a vanity project, I think it really needs to be used to influence conditionality in social security. I think fundamentally, I think we can see how awful the conditions that are put on social security are in this country and the human cost of that. And I think we have a real opportunity with the Welsh pilot to show how it can be done differently, and how removing those conditions has a wealth of positive impacts. And on the Jarrow project, our partner, well, the group really leading the pilot is Grange Big Local in East Finchley, and big local central Jarrow in Jarrow, so she might have heard of the big local because I know they do a lot of work with the schools. We've spent a lot of the time so far sort of putting the groundwork together to make sure that we are prepared to collect the data and capture what people are saying about the idea. There's been some surveying at some of their events. We've just recruited a research partner that we're super excited about, so we are now ready to go and do this big data collection, and we're going to be doing some focus groups in October or November, I can't remember, but I can make sure that you have the dates and that they can go to this person because that's very helpful for us.
Great, thanks. We can do one more round of questions. Okay, so let's go these three here. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, we'll start with the gentleman over here. The guy with his hand up. In the middle? Yeah.
Hello everyone, lovely to see you all. My name's Dodo. So I wanted to ask is, do you feel that a universal basic income is in conflict with the idea of universal basic services? Because it feels to me that the concept of universal basic services forces consideration of the organizational necessities that would underpin delivering basic standards to everyone in a way that a universal basic income doesn't necessarily guarantee, and it forces a society to start thinking about the composition of the economy and what the workforce is doing and what is being created, and how consumption and production is working in a way that a universal basic income doesn't necessarily look at by himself. So do these things come together once one has been established, or are they in conflict? Would be my question.
Thanks. Next question. From, yep. Just put your hand up. Yep. Yep. Yeah. Put your hand up for Rory.
I suppose it's a little bit similar. It's about how to win the argument against people who have those fears and are worried that I thought it was me for a second. Who have that fear that the system will fall apart immediately because so many jobs are so exploitative, and the fear that everything will fall apart. And how do you win that argument when you're having that real conversation with someone about it?
Do you mean because people will stop doing certain forms of work which are
of
terrible?
course they will, as is the hope, but it's like the transition through that. How do you allay people's fears that everything will fall apart? Obviously the health workers thing is one example, but other jobs that are extremely exploitative but are like deeply relied on for the running of the country shouldn't be exploitative, obviously, but what happens in that transition, and how do you allay people's fears about that?
Thank you. And yeah, just pass it that way. Yeah. No, down the line.
Cheers. I suppose, it sort of goes off. I'm so sorry. I suppose, it just goes off the question about the universal basic services as well. It's sort of wondering kind of what the benefits are of universal basic income compared to just sort of a more targeted, a kind of benefit system, and perhaps universal basic services which are more targeted towards sort of the most vulnerable in society. Sort of in the sense that universal basic income, I suppose the idea of it being universal, you're going to get those, someone on sort of earning over 100k isn't going to need sort of the money provided by universal basic income that someone sort of earning sort of on 20k is. And I suppose sort of the argument of like the tax-free allowance or money being redistributed from a tax-free allowance to universal basic income, given that the tax-free allowance sort of benefits someone over 100k as it does sort of someone earning sort of like 10k, even if it it benefits someone sort of earning 10k sort of slightly more. I suppose is it the same problem with universal basic income, that it's not particularly targeted, sort of where a universal basic services would be. I kind of understand that the point about perhaps sort of someone earning a certain amount would feel almost sort of better about someone earning sort of a lower income getting access to benefits if they're getting the same sort of the same benefits. But I don't know. I suppose should we on the left sort of be promoting that kind of mentality that you should only be that some people should only get access to benefits if you yourself are getting access to those same benefits, or just the idea that there should be access to everyone, but some people are going to need access to them more than others, i.e. sort of those earning below a certain amount.
Okay, thank you. Let's give the panelists an opportunity to answer. I also have some thoughts, but we'll let you guys answer.
To me, the answer to, or the response to the question about universal basic income versus universal basic services is It's really simple because I think they're just very different policy proposals. Like a universal basic income is one policy that has one policy objective, which is guarantee that no one is ever without income. That one policy can achieve that policy objective. Universal basic services can be universal, but the basic services part of that policy proposal is incredibly difficult to achieve. And that is our big aspiration as a society. That is what we absolutely do need, that to have the progressed society that we're looking to build. It's not going to come just from a basic income. It isn't. But it is unacceptable to leave people without an income while we're doing that longer term political project. I just think that that is the nub of the question. Like, we can't wait to guarantee people an income. Too many people are already waiting and they're suffering because of that. So, and the sort of the question about people leaving jobs and winning that argument, I mean, we called our organization Basic Income Conversation because I think those concerns are really valid, you know, that it's not about winning the argument about them, it's finding a solution to how we make sure we address that in the process of rolling out this policy, because it is big change. So we need to do it carefully.
Thanks, Chloe. Let's pick up that question then about how we win the argument that the system would fall apart if people had enough money to avoid exploitative work. If people stopped doing the exploitative work, then, and this may seem like a truism, the exploitative work would stop being done. And then we would have to make a decision of how important was that really? And if it is important, then pay people the right amount of money to do it. Because if you're a social care worker, I think that's actually quite important, and you deserve to be paid properly for it. And if that's what it costs, that's what it costs. So isn't it interesting that free marketeers oppose this kind of proposal, and yet they have policies in place, exactly as we saw on Friday. Kwasi Kwarteng's latest one is, we're going to make it impossible for people to avoid this. It's not prices finding their natural level. It's a coercive arm of the state forcing people to do things, generally to make a huge amount of profit for people. In the care industry is one example, instead of actually for the benefit of society. And I think one of the ways that I like to think is, well, let's imagine it the other way around. Let's imagine we did have a society in which people were paid for the genuine social value of their labour. And then someone came along and said, I've got this idea. What we'll do is all of this stuff that we own, we're going to take it off you, and we'll let a few people own it, and then they can take a large amount of wealth out of it. Do you think that's a good idea? And you look at it from that point of view, and you look at the system we've got, it's utterly ridiculous and needs to be flipped. Yes, there needs to be a mechanism to get innovation, to get capital into the right socially productive systems. Money is very, very useful. But rent seeking, which is really what is ripping us off in an enormous way, it's just magical thinking to think that that is of a benefit to society. And you can go right back to the founder of modern economics. Adam Smith railed against rent seeking, and funnily enough, just like climate denialism, it seems to be people who are paid an awful lot of money by very rich people who come up with theories of why this don't work.
Thank you. Did you have anything to add?
I can't really add much to that. I thought that was an excellent contribution. I mean, for me, and I suppose I finished with the fact that this UBI pilot in Wales has got to be seen as part of a broader agenda to transform society to socialism. It's not complicated for me. So it's not either or. We have to look at and test all of these various policy proposals to achieve a fairer socialist society. And I do support universal basic services. We need a wealth tax. So if somebody on a higher income is having UBI, you know, they're not going to be earning that much, and a wealth tax would, claw back money from them. So it has to be seen, for me, in the much broader picture of the socialist policies that need to be promoted. And the pilots are key to this, to establish what works. I'm not convinced yet, honestly, that UBI is, the panacea to everything, which is why I am always supportive of the various pilots that are taking place. And I'm open to other suggestions. So it's not an either-or for me.
Great, thanks. Silver bullets don't exist. We have no time left, so thank you everyone for attending, and thank you for the panelists. I think we should end on that spirit of hope that was mentioned a few times. I think the important thing to know about hope is that hope doesn't just happen, it's generated. And progressive, ambitious policies and demands and ideas about what future society will be and should be is how we generate hope, how we cultivate hope, and that's a really important thing. So enjoy the rest of the festival.
And do stay in touch with us. Lena's going to be at the door handing out flyers. It has a QR code on there. You'll get an email from us in the UBI Lab Network, and we can tell you how we can keep in touch.